just another normal evening. I was 24, staying with my aunt, uncle, and their 2 kids, her 15-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son. Growing up, my sisters and I helped raise them, so we always felt like bonus siblings. On this particular night, my aunt was decorating a float for the Christmas parade, and my uncle was at work, leaving me home alone with the toddler for several hours. It was something I'd done countless times before. He was a good kid, just the usual toddler mischief. Nothing I couldn't handle. But that night was different. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I heard the unmistakable sound of tiny feet pounding across the floor. My 2-year-old nephew came running into the kitchen, screaming in terror. His face was pale, eyes wide, and he clung to my leg as though his life depended on it. His body trembled with fear. I tried to calm him, but he wouldn't let go. "What's wrong?" I whispered, trying to soothe him, but all he could do was point at the front door, repeating one word over and over: "Door, door." I didn't understand what was going on, but his fear was palpable, and it made my stomach twist. I picked him up, holding him tightly, and glanced at the door. There was nothing I could see, but the weight of the moment felt suffocating, like something was wrong, something unseen. This house has a history, one I've heard whispered about by my aunt and uncle. Before they bought it in 1989, there were rumors that 2 brothers had killed each other on the property. I never gave it much thought, but after what happened that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered in the walls. Something dark, something angry. The fear in my nephew's eyes was enough to leave me shaken to my core. What he saw that night, it wasn't just a bad dream, it was something real. This happened to me about 11 years ago, and it's something I'll never forget. I grew up in rural England, and while I was no stranger to walking long distances, this one night changed everything. One of my friends lived about 3 miles away from my house, and I'd often visit him to hang out and play video games. But this particular night, I was walking home after a late visit, and I decided to take the shortcut through the woods. Now, the woods weren't exactly welcoming at night. In fact, they were the kind of woods that seemed to swallow sound. The path was familiar, but as I entered the treeline, I realized my phone was nearly dead. I had enough power for a few moments of flashlight use, but I knew I'd soon be in complete darkness. I walked into the woods, the chill of the night creeping into my bones. As the light on my phone flickered out, I was plunged into inky blackness, the kind of darkness that presses against you, makes you feel like something is waiting just beyond the edge of your vision. I stumbled forward, relying on the faint outlines of familiar landmarks. A crooked tree stump, a half-fallen fir, an enormous puddle. But then something changed. A smell, sharp and acrid, cigarette smoke. My heart skipped a beat. Who else would be out here at this hour? I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement. And then I heard it, a cough, a deep, guttural sound. I quickened my pace, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Then came the sound of branches snapping, followed by the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps behind me. They were getting closer. I broke into a run, desperate to escape, but the ground beneath me shifted from a clear path to thick brush. I tripped and fell hard, my knee scraping the earth. I lay there, breathless, listening to the footsteps draw nearer. The sound of crunching leaves and snapping twigs grew louder, as though someone was closing in on me. Then a light flashed, bright and blinding. I froze, my body stiff, too terrified to move. The beams swept across the trees, and in that moment, I heard muttering, a low, deep growl. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt tight. Suddenly the light went out. Silence. The air grew thick with tension. I lay there, eyes wide open, straining to hear anything, but all I could hear was the ragged wheezing of someone. No, something, right above me. I didn't dare move. Minutes passed. The footsteps receded, growing faint, but my fear didn't abate. I stayed perfectly still, praying that whatever it was wouldn't hear me. When I finally summoned the courage to move, I took cautious, measured steps, trying to be as quiet as possible. I stumbled back toward the path, the darkness pressing in on me. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent me into a panic. But then, finally, I saw the streetlights filtering in through the trees. Relief flooded me, but as I neared the edge of the woods, my heart sank. There, silhouetted against the dim light, stood a figure. A man, unmoving, blocking the path. My breath caught in my throat. I froze. I didn't know who he was, but he wasn't supposed to be there. I made a split-second decision. I ran toward him, toward the exit. As I approached, I heard him mutter a curse under his breath, and I felt something tug at my jacket. I cleared the sheep gate in one leap, and as I crossed into the light, I glanced back. The man was gone. The woods behind me were silent. I never took that path again. This story takes place 7 years ago in my small town. It was a typical afternoon. I had ordered 2 desks for my sons, and when the delivery man arrived, I asked him to bring the desk kits inside. The moment he walked in, I got an unsettling feeling, like something wasn't quite right, but I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. He started making small talk, asking odd questions, ones that weren't appropriate. "Do you live alone?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. That's when my instincts screamed at me, danger. I kept my cool, responding, "I have my sons and my ex-husband comes by regularly. This is a rare quiet moment." The delivery man's eyes flickered with something dark, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He didn't leave immediately after delivering the desks, and I started to feel trapped in my own home. That's when my ex showed up with the kids. The dogs from the neighbor's house, trained to be guard dogs, immediately started growling low in their throats as he walked past. When my ex noticed, his instincts kicked in. He stood at the ready, scanning the delivery man's every movement. After a tense moment, the delivery man left, but I wasn't at ease. My ex's alertness confirmed what I already knew. Something wasn't right. I called a friend who worked at the furniture store where the delivery man worked, and I found out I wasn't the only one who had complained. He had been fired for inappropriate behavior toward multiple women. It wasn't until years later that I realized how close I had come to a far more dangerous situation. Small towns may seem safe, but sometimes they hide the most sinister people right under your nose. A mystery in the woods. I spent a lot of my childhood exploring the thick woods behind my grandparents' house, the kind of forest where you lose track of time and the world feels miles away. Most of the time, I wasn't alone. My younger cousin Ben was always by my side. He was the kind of kid who wasn't afraid of much except maybe the dark, something I never let him live down. But this story, the one that haunts me still, didn't involve much darkness. Not at first, anyway. You see, one year in school I got this backpack with a built-in compass. It wasn't much. It only worked when you placed it flat on the ground, but it was enough to make me feel like I had a magical tool in my hands. We could go deeper into the woods now. No more wandering aimlessly and hoping we didn't get lost. I had a direction. I had a purpose. And for an adventurous 12-year-old, that was as close to freedom as you could get. So, one day after meeting Ben by the levee, where we usually started our treks, we decided to go further than ever before. We were determined to make it deeper into the forest, maybe even get lost for a while and find something we hadn't seen before. We walked for hours, trekking past familiar places, until the trees began to thicken, the air cooler. After a while we came across something strange. A clearing. But it wasn't like the other clearings we'd found. It was nearly a perfect rectangle. Only one corner was bent in by trees, as though nature itself couldn't quite form a flawless line. The size was unsettling. About half the size of a football field, but it felt more like a stage set for something we were meant to see. And the grass, this wasn't just any grass. It was thick, dark green, the kind you see on a wealthy man's perfectly manicured lawn. It wasn't the dry, scraggly stuff that clung to the underbrush of the woods. The stuff looked out of place. I looked at Ben. "Do you know anyone who lives out here? A farm or something?" I asked. He just shook his head, eyes wide. No one." We circled the perimeter, scanning for any sign of a road, a trail, anything that would make sense of this strange patch of land. But there was nothing. Just thorns and bushes like the rest of the forest. It was as if the clearing had appeared out of nowhere, dropped in place, untouched by time. Now, anyone who's spent enough time in the woods knows that an area of grass that's darker and thicker than the rest is often a sign of something off, whether it's a carcass decomposing underneath or something more sinister. So, as we cautiously walked toward the center, we noticed something. A patch of grass was oddly bright, almost unnaturally bright. It stood out like a sore thumb, and in the middle of that patch, a spine, just a spine. No skull, no ribs, no flesh. The bones were clean, stark white against the unnatural green grass. It was long, too long, stretched out and flat like something that should have been curved but wasn't. Maybe it was a cow or a horse, something common to these woods. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the bones of any animal. It was wrong. Should we go back? Ben asked, his voice thin, shaky. I didn't want to show it, but I was just as creeped out as he was. Still, I was the older cousin, the brave one. I had to act like it didn't bother me, So I pulled out my compass, eager to find our way home. And then things got weird. 3 things hit me at once. First, I noticed the spine was pointing directly in the direction we'd come from, straight, as though it was guiding us. Second, the silence. It wasn't the normal forest hum. No birds, no rustling squirrels, no buzzing insects. Nothing. The silence was oppressive, heavy, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. And third, my compass. I looked down at it in my hands, expecting to see the little needle pointing north, but the glass was cracked, right down the middle. The glass on that compass was thick, nearly bulletproof. It wasn't something that could crack so easily. It felt like it had been tampered with, as if something had shattered it, something powerful. I didn't want to say anything to Ben. I didn't want him to freak out. He was already on edge, and I didn't want him to start thinking that we were in danger. So I slung my backpack back over my shoulders, tried to act normal, and started walking in what I thought was the direction we'd come from. But the further we walked, the more I realized something wasn't right. The path didn't feel familiar. The trees didn't look the same. The air seemed colder. And even though I had the compass, it wasn't working. It just spun and spun as if the needle was broken for good. We kept walking. We retraced our steps, trying to find the clearing again. But no matter how far we went, no matter how many times we walked the same distance, the clearing was gone. It had vanished. We never found it again. No matter how many times Ben and I tried, no matter how many years we went back, we couldn't locate that strange, unnatural place in the woods. It was like the forest had swallowed it whole. And then I heard the story from my older cousin, the one who had gone into the woods with my brother. They'd found something too, something just as bizarre. A lean-to made of broken glass and bungee cords, abandoned and decaying. They couldn't find it again either. It was like the woods didn't want them to remember what they'd seen. I've read about similar things. People finding towns in the desert or strange structures in the woods, and then trying to go back to them only to find that they vanished. They were there once, but now they're gone. Maybe it's a phenomenon. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. But it's something that stayed with me, haunting me more than I care to admit. So, if you've ever had an experience like this, where you found something that shouldn't exist only to lose it forever, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more eerie tales like this. You never know what you'll find in the woods, or what might find you.